Hey there, it's 2026. We are 1 month in, and I wanted to ask you, how are you going? There's a multitude of studies that demonstrate around this time, about 80% of people have abandoned their New Year's goals and resolutions. Are you one of them? And what about your leadership intentions? Have you kept the focus that you were planning to? Were you sticking to the plan? Are you sustaining those new routines that you intended to when you started the year? Or have you reverted back to some of those old habits as the pace and the pressure begins to pick up? Maybe for you, it's not full-blown abandonment, at least not yet. See, maybe you've started really well, but you've returned back to some of those 2025 operating rhythms just because you haven't kept those 2026 changes front of mind. And if you're not careful, the weeks will go by and you come to realize that abandonment doesn't always happen in a single conscious decision, but it happens with a slow and gradual shift of your attention elsewhere. I've certainly found myself over the last couple of weeks dangerously close to slumping back into that stale status quo of BAU. Rather than keeping my focus renewed on the adjustments and commitments that I'd started the year with, those adjustments that are designed to make me more effective this year. I don't know about you, but I can certainly relate to John Maxwell when he writes, the hardest person that you will ever have to lead is yourself. And self-leadership, well, it's an important starting point for every single leader. See, for a leader to be chosen by a group of people, to be viewed as a leader, they need to exhibit the qualities and the behaviors that will make that group successful. In other words, they need to be a role model. And in psychology, the theorists and the academics, and they make this differentiation between self-management versus self-leadership. Self-management really is around managing one's behavior in order to meet external standards and expectations of others. The difference between that and self-leadership is that self-leadership is around influencing your own thoughts, your own behaviors, in order to align them and achieve your own goals and your own standards. See, self-management is very centered around meeting the expectations of others. It's externally oriented and often driven by extrinsic motivations, such as gaining a reward or avoiding some sort of negative consequence. Self-leadership, however, it's intrinsic. It involves shaping your inner world, which are your thoughts, and the way that you engage with the outer world, that's your behaviors, in order to achieve your own goals and maintain your own standards. Self-leadership builds the credibility to lead others. And as a result, you will be an influence on those around you. You end up influencing the thoughts, the behaviors, the standards of others, rather than being influenced by them. Now, there's a variety of different strategies that you could use as a leader to influence yourself, your thoughts, your behaviors. But your self-talk is probably the most prominent strategy that's used by leaders out there. Your self-talk, your inner dialogue, which describes how you choose to respond to the automatic thoughts that pop up in your head as you go about your leadership. We all do it, whether we're conscious or not. And so depending on what we say to ourselves, will either lifts us up or it can drag us down. There's one study where they examined the self-talk of 189 CEOs and managing directors. And these were from companies around the globe, so the most senior leaders, successful leaders in their field. And what they found was there was this wide variety of the content of the self-talk. It ranged from very negative to very positive. And one of the key themes that kind of came out there, that emerged, was how these leaders viewed challenges. And the self-talk often framed the challenges as either obstacles or opportunities? When there's a problem or a challenge in front of you, do you say, oh no, here is a problem, this is going to stop us? Or do you go, oh wow, here's an opportunity, all right? Here's a chance for us to prove how good we are, to prove how agile we are, an opportunity for us to develop some sort of new capability, do something different. When we're looking at the impact of self-talk, the research find that those senior leaders who demonstrated a more constructive and positive self-talk, well, they were more effective at leading people and they experienced less stress in the workplace. And I think that's something that we all want. And the research also says that those whose self-talk was more negative, they demonstrated a reduction in creativity, which meant a reduced capacity to solve the problems that they actually faced. So the internal conversation matters. Your internal conversation matters. And how you talk to yourself, it matters because it not only reveals the thought patterns that you're having, but it reinforces them. See, the more we repeat these thoughts and the associated dialogue that comes with them, the stronger and more defined the related neural pathways in our brain become. And that means they are quicker, they activate more readily, and they become more entrenched in our brain. We're literally rewiring our brain as a result of our self-talk. Eventually, those neural pathways can become so entrenched, they activate so fast that we're not even aware that they're firing. And it's at this point where we become, they become a belief, and they begin to shape the way that we perceive our world around us. So this is pretty powerful stuff, right? If you're not careful and intentional about curating your internal dialogue, well, you can talk yourself into negative beliefs and toss aside those rose-colored glasses of optimism only to replace them with the grey-stained pair that focus only on problems, obstacles, and threats. And that's not conducive to enjoying your life and your leadership, but neither is it conducive to performing well at it. So, my question to you now is, what's going on inside your head? What's your self-talk? And to help you elevate that this year, there's this great question I'd love to ask yourself. It's one that I picked up from Chris Williamson in a podcast I was watching recently. And that question is, what are the thoughts you repeated too many times last year? What are the thoughts that you repeated too many times last year? That's a great question. It's really powerful. And it helps surface those thought patterns and the self-talk that may be problematic. If you're doing it too often, then it's going to become problematic. And this allows you to then take the time to develop an intentional response, replacing the automatic negative thoughts with a more encouraging, positive one. In essence, you don't just talk to yourself, we talk back to ourselves. And we want an encouraging internal monologue rather than a demoralizing monologue. All right. So here's the pro tip, right? If you're struggling to figure out what's the thought that I replace these negative thoughts with, how do I have some more positive self-talk, then I want you to consider this. Identify the thought, all right, that's coming too often. What's that negative self-talk statement? And then I want you to think about, what would you say to one of your team members that you're leading if they came to you and verbalized that statement? How would you encourage them? How would you respond? Because the way that you would respond to others is probably the very thing that you need to hear. It's the very way that you need to respond to yourself. So self-talk is one of those strategies that people use to lead themselves. What's most commonly used, it's the simplest to implement. It's a great place to start when it comes to intentionally lifting your own leadership game. And here's the thing, if it works for you, well, then it can probably work for others. Why not ask that same question to your team? What were the thoughts that they experienced and repeated too often last year? Self-leadership is not just for senior leaders. it's worth considering and implementing for you. It's worth considering for implementing with your team as well. So until next time, lead well.